Testing. and then you should be able to speak right there. Hey everyone, we're gonna get started, so if you wanna take your seats, that'd be great. We're still waiting for one of our panelists, but they'll join soon. So my name is Maddie. I'm gonna be moderating tonight. I'm also a writer for Left Voice, which is a independent socialist publication, which both tries to put forward theory about revolution and strategy, and also reports on class struggle with perspectives from the rank and file, like our nurses here. Today, we're also part of an international network of left news sites in 5 languages and 12 countries. And if you want more information about any of this, if you want to write with us, get more involved, there's more information at the tables in the back, and talk to any one of us. That'd be really great. We're really excited. Okay, so before we hear from our speakers, I just want to start out by saying thank you both to all of our panelists and also to the organizations who co-sponsored the event this evening: Left Voice, DSA Socialist Feminist Working Group, DSA Labor Branch, and Red Bloom. I think all of our participation tonight shows very clearly that the nurses' struggle this spring was not just about negotiating for a better contract, but about fighting for the needs of a workforce primarily composed of women, many of them immigrants and women of color. It shows that there is no labor movement without the fight for the most oppressed parts of society, and vice versa. And this isn't just a principle or an ideal. Recent experience has shown us very clearly that the very center of the revival of the labor movement in the United States has occurred in these very sectors of the workforce that are predominantly composed of women and composed of care workers. The nurses' struggle is the most recent ripple in a wave of labor activity in sectors of workers responsible for social reproduction. Those workers who keep society running by teaching students, by feeding and housing our communities, and caring for patients. We're living in a moment when these sectors are particularly vulnerable to attack, when cuts to social programs and increased privatization are worsening conditions not only for workers, but for the people they care for in their workplaces each day. In the healthcare industry, private hospitals and healthcare companies make billions of dollars in profits, while nurses and patients bear the brunt of cuts in funding and the high cost of healthcare. And for us, this means that the struggles that healthcare workers wage for better conditions for themselves and for their patients are inseparable from the demand for universal, free healthcare. And in light of the most recent threats to abortion access in the United States and around the world, as socialist feminists, we realize that the fight for universal healthcare must also include the demand for free and safe abortion for all those who get pregnant. But we're also living in a moment when class struggle, particularly in the healthcare and other social reproduction sectors, is on the rise. In just the last year, tens of thousands of teachers and unions across the country staged the largest public sector strikes in recent history. Thousands of hotel workers and nurses followed suit in some of the biggest strikes those sectors have ever seen in the United States. And then, what we're here to talk about tonight, in New York City in 2018, NYSNA nurses began negotiating for a new contract which called primarily for better wages, health benefits, and safe staffing. For months, management and hospital executives refused to budge on these issues. Rank and file nurses, including many of those on our panel tonight, worked tirelessly, both in their workplaces, fighting against management's tactics, as well as in the union, pushing back against the political jockeying of leadership and fighting for a more democratic and combative union. These negotiations escalated, as we know, in March when 10,000 nurses in private hospitals across New York City threatened to go on strike. Of the 9,000 nurses who voted, 97% voted to authorize the strike. Management began making calls for scabs and pressuring nurses not to participate in work stoppages. And nurses began picketing and agitating in their workplaces to prepare to strike. So this made it all the more surprising when management came back with new terms for the contract, one which didn't address the main demand for safe staffing, and the union leadership, with little input from the rank and file nurses, lifted the strike notice and initiated an intense campaign to ratify this new contract. Despite a widely supported Vote No campaign, 3 of the 4 hospitals accepted the contract, with the 4th eventually ratifying a contract with similar terms. And this is the fight that our panelists are going to talk about tonight. They're going to discuss and reflect on the contract strike fight in New York City this spring, the union leadership's role in those negotiations, and the lessons we can take moving forward. We also have on our panel nurses from other sectors of NYSNA, including nurses from the public sector, who are going to be sharing their perspectives on their upcoming contract negotiations, as well as a nurse from a hospital upstate, who will talk about her experience in NYSNA fighting for democracy within the union. So our panelists are each going to speak for about 7 minutes each, followed by a full hour for Q&A, where our panelists will be able to ask each other questions, respond to each other, and you'll be able to ask them questions. So as the panelists are speaking, start collecting your questions so we can have a good conversation. And finally, just so we're all aware, we are live streaming the panel part of the discussion. We'll stop recording at the Q&A, but for right now, we're live streaming and recording. And so lastly, just before we begin, the very last thing, I just want to say again how proud we are, specifically as socialist feminists, to be hosting this particular event. In an international situation in which the right wing is advancing around the world, the nurses' struggle is a prime example of how women are in the front lines against these forces and the forces of capitalist exploitation, both in their workplaces and in the wider feminist movement. As socialist feminists, we need to put forward strategies which link these two struggles in order to defeat the very system which creates the conditions of our oppression and exploitation. So I'm going to introduce our first panelist today. We're going to hear from Bobby Jo Otis, a 16-year nurse at the Champlain Valley Physicians Hospital in Plattsburgh, which is a 6-hour drive from here. So thank you so much, so much for coming. She is a contract action team coordinator for contract negotiations and a former executive committee member who held the RN seat. She's now co-chair for the Caucus of Nurses and Professionals for a Democratic Union. So thanks.
Thank you, and thank you for everybody waiting on us to get here through the torrential downpours as we went 18 blocks in the wrong direction. But that's okay. So we're going to talk about some of the issues that everybody here in the city has been facing during contract, and some of the issues that we had faced at CVPH, and ones that we're facing now because our contract runs out in December of this year. Through our process through 2016, working with NYSNA and our union rep, we were able to set up a very detailed public and community campaign. We were able to take everything out to the community through rallies, throughout all of these processes, with the belief that NYSNA executives were supporting us and feeding us and going to send us help to help us push through our campaign. Unfortunately, through that, we ran into many obstacles, and unfortunately, they weren't just from our employer. They were from the offices here in New York City. We had a great rep. He was pushing hard. He was teaching us, giving us the information that we needed to become a strong executive committee and to push our hospital into safe staffing. We have some of the best numbers in New York State as far as patient ratios. We have a 5-to-1 ratio, so we have 5 patients to 1 nurse. Our team was built in 2012 where we had a nurse and a clinical assistant with 5 patients. Beautiful numbers. Best numbers probably around. We didn't want any better than that. We wanted to maintain that, and we wanted to have it put into our contract. We wanted those numbers in there concrete so that we could bargain if we needed to. We were set on that. We rallied every Friday night for almost a year, the entire year of 2016. Community came out with us, rallied, horn beeping, all of those things that we're all taught to do to strengthen our campaign. We went into negotiations in October. Our representative was forced out by Jill Ferrillo here in New York City because of the fact that he had fed us so much information and there were so many backdoor deals going on that they had to stop it somehow because we were the only hospital so far that was going to get Plan A health insurance for all of our employees. Great cost, tier one, the highest tier that there was, and NYSNA had guaranteed CVPH that we would only fight for a Plan B. So because we did not follow that road, there had to be a way to figure out how to stop it. So what ended up happening was our rep was, had supposedly charges filed against him saying that he had accosted one of the lawyers through NYSNA, that he had accosted Steve Toft. There's no public record. There was no arrest record. It happened in a restaurant, supposedly. We have statements from the manager there and staff saying that nothing like that ever happened when they were there. They still forced him out. At the same time, we were pushing our campaign forward, and we had the NYSNA credit card was shut off, so we couldn't purchase, we couldn't pay for flyers to be printed, we couldn't do anything to go out to the public. We had banners made to be in the local parade, and they kept, quote unquote, misprinting by accident, slowing those processes down. We had ULPs that had been filed and had been dropped and withdrawn without us knowing. Gabe Crystal was behind that. And I have no problem saying names, as you see. Everything is out in the open. We had arbitrations that had been dropped and ended up, our facility, CVPH management, refused to negotiate with our executive committee over or through arbitrations and through our ULPs or anything like that unless Gabe Crystal was in the room. Thank you. Sorry. Gabe was the old area director for the western part of New York State. So through all of this, we continued to push as we had been taught by our old rep. We got shut down. We got told by Steve Toft in our negotiations that we were not going to be able to, you're not going to get that. That's unrealistic. Don't think that's going to happen. This is the best it's going to get. As we were fighting for staffing, and basically we're told, you've got some sort of numbers in your contract. That's the best it's going to get. Don't push any further. It's unacceptable to us. We ended up dividing, our executive committee divided down the middle. And shortly after, we ended up, everybody was exhausted after 10 months of meetings and negotiations. With the split happening, we ended up basically taking the contract as it was, believing the words that were given to us that we could use the staffing, this grid per se, as a way to bargain with our facility through our staffing committee. Absolutely not true, okay? So I want to tell you all, if you hear that grids are negotiable and they're not writing in your contract and agreed upon, it's an absolute lie. You need concrete numbers, concrete ratios per unit in your contract. or set dates to have this stuff happen. Okay? Meeting set, exactly what you need. So we're here where we are right now because of the fact we've been fighting the staffing for almost another 2 years. We have no campaign set. Our contract runs out in December. We have nothing happening in the community. We have nothing going on, period. Thank you. And we decided to build this Nurses and Professionals for Democratic Union caucus. Reached out to some brand new people who I've just met. We just came down yesterday. And reaching out to as many people who are listening to say, we get it, we've worked it, we've run this caucus before, and we've been able to put pressure on NYSNA to have them pay for a $30,000 campaign. They came up at the last minute and put on this great big ta-da for us. But it can be done. And if anybody has questions, concerns, or would like to talk to my peer Kristen and I about any of this, we have plenty of information. You can call us or email and continue the fight. Just stay strong, and everybody needs to stay together, all the hospitals. Everybody, anybody that's unionized, we can all use all the help that we can get. Thank you.
Okay, thanks so much. So next we're going to hear from four nurses in the private sector from the Big Four hospitals who were involved in the recent contract and strike fight this spring. So first, I think Diana Torres is up. She's been a nurse an acute rehab nurse at Mount Sinai West since 2014, and union executive committee member since June 2018. And she was part of the last negotiated contract and is now trying to rebuild the union in the aftermath. So.
So first of all, I want to thank you all for having me here, inviting me to this wonderful event where we can sort of discuss our big concerns at this time. So like it was mentioned, I was part of this last contract that was negotiated or that we got stuck with, which we got nothing really, but okay, which NYSNA called historic, but it was historic, I think, in the sense that we sort of got violated, so that might have been historic in the way it was done. But anyway, so it was my first time doing it, my first time being in a union, my first time being an executive member. We sort of went into it unprepared because our NYSNA reps didn't really go through what we were supposed to do or how we were supposed to do it, but we took on the challenge anyways and did it. Went into negotiations with all these hopes and dreams that we were finally gonna get what we needed for the sake of, nursing and the sake of our patients. I think the biggest thing was the patients, and the people that are really suffering is us as nurses having to sacrifice ourselves, our bodies, our mental health, and everything that we have to endure while we're working, and the conditions that we're put under. And also the patients, because they don't even know half of the times what they're being exposed to and how dangerous it can be. And like somebody mentioned, it's like drunk driving, right? Everybody's at risk, but nobody knows, and hopefully nothing happens, and most people get away, but there come the days where things do happen. While we were negotiating in my facility, I can speak for my facility, somebody did pass away while waiting to be seen, sort of taken into the ED. Person came in, and there was only one nurse in the triage area, and unfortunately, they didn't get to her on time, and she passed away. But of course, nobody is being told that. They're not telling the public that. They don't, management doesn't want anybody to know. but the fact that we know and can't really tell you, it's even more scary because then you don't know what you're being exposed to. Here you are thinking you're going into the hospital, and you see us trying our best, running around crazy because that's what we do anyways, but you don't really know what's going on behind doors. When we went into it, we were all hyped up. We're gonna get this, we have all this power, which I always said, if we outnumber every other healthcare professional, how is it possible that we're not getting nowhere near half of what everybody else is getting or has? How is it possible that, we are so strong and we're so smart and we know better? Because everybody in healthcare knows that whatever the nurse tells you, she knows, and it's factual. Nobody had an answer for it, but as the process went on, it became clear that the power we had, we were, by trusting others, giving up our power. Because we're hoping that our leaders will do the right thing for us, yet we don't know that it's become this huge political thing, and they have friends in all the right places, and they move things around the way they need to for their convenience. Meanwhile, we were being used as tokens for what they wanted for us and not what we needed for us and the patients. So we sat there, we sat through it, we suffered through it, and then one day, here comes somebody, pops out of nowhere, some mediator that said, when he first walked into the room, I cost a lot of money, and I'm very famous. So I'm sitting there, I'm already a little angry because I'm thinking, so are we supposed to say thank you for coming, or I was a little like, whatever. We had federal mediators since November. Now we're talking about what, March, April? So apparently he was gonna save the day. I'm like, okay. We sit through it, so now they're filtering information, and I'm talking about the leadership. I see people coming in and out, now they're dividing the groups, now they're handpicking people off of the committees. They're going upstairs to negotiate with management. The rest of us are sitting there thinking we're waiting for something. We're waiting for nothing. They're doing our negotiations upstairs for us, and we don't know anything about it. We asked what happened, nothing happened. Okay, sure enough, the contract was negotiated for us prior to us even getting there, I think, because it just went out like thin air, like things just disappeared. Steve Toff is saying, this is all you can get, this is all you're gonna get, you should be so thankful and proud, this is historic. So we're all sitting there like, are we missing something? We were missing something. It was settled for us. Staffing ratios, we got 9 nurses, and we needed over 200 to establish a ratio that would look like 5-to-1. On a good day, you work with 6 patients. If you got lucky, it can go up to 7 or 8, and if you have a discharge, it can look more like 9. In the ED, 12 to 15 patients on a good day. If you have an ICU patient, you're still rolling with 10, hoping that those are okay enough so you can make that one survive. So we clearly divided. Some of the nurses were like, this is so historic, this is amazing. In my confusion, I'm angry now, we're lashing at each other, going back and forth. Now they're filtering what we're saying on social media. Now they're threatening and saying, oh, you can't post this. We get kicked out of our own pages, so we can't even speak to our own nurses because they were saying we were targeting people and not being respectful, and all we were saying was voicing our anger and giving our own opinion. So in that, I found out that maybe our union, it's not what we thought it should be for us. And it's time for us to take back our power and take accountability for the things that we have to do for us because only we know. I get it. They're not nurses. And if they are, they haven't been nurses in the facilities for many years. Maybe they can't relate any longer. But I said, you know, while I'm here, I might as well try my best to do the right thing for us. And if it kills me, then maybe by the time I'm retiring or something, then I'll see a change. So at this point, whatever it takes, we're gonna have to do it on our own. We'll try to create a more democratic union, but it's gonna have to come from us. Thank you.
Hi, good evening. I just want to let you know I'm super nervous, so I wrote everything down on my phone, so forgive me if I'm not looking directly at you. Anyway, my name is Catherine Fernandez. I work at Montefiore. I've been a nurse for 25 years. I'm not going to repeat what Diane said. Everything she said is completely true. So I will go and talk more about what happened after, about during the voting process. Anyway, I did become an active member in 2014. I'm also part of the Finance Committee. And I truly believed in NISNA. But I want to talk again about my experience through the campaign about safe staffing. Because Montefiore Bronx, we have the worst staffing. We don't have any ratios in the ER. And we can have, you said you have 12 to 15? We can have 9 to 12 ICU patients to one nurse. In the level 3, which is the med-surg side, they can get 15, 20. If they get 11, it's a good day. So on the floors, yes, they get 8, but they have ratios. There is a give back in this ratio, in this contract, because they're making that ratios more into grids. And there's a big difference, like you said, between ratios and grids. And I just want to make that clear as well. Okay, and I think she already explained why it's important to stay with the ratios. Wait a minute, lost my notes here. Okay. However, okay. We did not achieve the improved ratios in our inpatient units. We did not achieve ratios in our emergency room. That was our primary goal, and we were unsuccessful. We have won mechanisms that may allow us to accomplish our goals, but that is not what we wanted for our nurses and our patients. What I want to discuss is the treatment by the staff of the union that I had thought I loved. Okay? During the voting process, I received a letter during our second ratification vote accusing me of crimes against humanity, well, at least against the ratification process, right? This letter was sent to me by NISA staff at 9 p.m. after the first day of face-to-face voting. I was crushed. I was not interacting with any of the members as we had silenced and essentially sidelined by the numerous additional NISNA staff that had been sent and infiltrated our buildings. I could not effectively be around, meet, and talk to our members as our previous practice. I was not even present on the day in question. How could I do what I was being accused of? It was one thing to silence me and remove me from my position of leadership and to watch my every move while I'm on the premises. I do take exception when I'm not present and ill. I don't know how we move forward if it is all possible and how we keep our members engaged in our union. Yesenia. Okay.
I don't know. We have a nurse, a Montefiore nurse, who's in Connecticut right now, or she's actually coming off shift now. She was also one of the people on the executive committee who organized basically for a democratic voting process. And so she's calling in, but hopefully she'll be able to connect. But you guys can go ahead.
If I may, could you explain what we're...
Yeah. We'll have time for Q&A in a bit. So next we're going to hear from two nurses in the public sector, Callie and Lillian. And so do you want to go ahead?
Sorry for being late, guys. Anyways, my name is Kelly. I work at Jacobi Medical Center, which is one of the private hospitals. This is public hospital, sorry. This is Lillian. She works at Lincoln. We just wanted to talk more about the experience that we've been having for our contract, which expires on June 5th, and we really haven't had a lot of attention towards our contract at all. I think because of the amount of attention that was going towards private hospitals, private sector. That being said, there seems to be, much like the difference between reimbursement and money for like private hospitals, like there seems to be like a two-tiered healthcare system. You have your private patients with insurance, and then you have your public patients that the public hospitals, it doesn't matter if you're insured, it doesn't matter if you're undocumented, we'll take everybody, which is something that I'm really proud of. But it seems to us in the public sector that we also are feeling a level of it's like an imbalance from our union too. So it's like we're kind of treated like martyrs. I felt that I've been at this hospital for 3.5 years. I worked at a private place for a year before, and being in this public sector now, it's felt like a lot of the resources from the union are not available to, or as many of those resources are not available to us. Like I said, there's been zero media attention towards ours. Oh, there she is. Hey! We should hear from her. No, you want to keep going? Okay. Okay. So yeah, basically, we've been not having a lot of resources towards our campaign. I think that it weakens us tremendously because we can't really, we're supposed to be getting all this public support, and we really don't have a lot of the resources that were allotted. Like I know when the Big Four was campaigning, or was bargaining and campaigning, there was like signs at bus stops, and we really have had none of that. And it's kind of like we are kind of left to the wayside, and I'm sure like you felt the same way from being so far away. And it's difficult because we are the same union, and we always talk about being the same union, but it also, in that same sense, we felt that a lot of our leadership has almost wanted to keep us separated. I've felt like I've heard from several leaders that the private sector nurses are greedy. All they want is, they get paid so much more money than we do, so they're not gonna, their campaign is all about, it's about money, and they make so much more money, and you guys take care of everybody, and it's almost like we're these martyrs. And the reality is that we're having really horrible working conditions too. Like I work in a level 1 trauma center in the ER, and we're supposed to have like 21 nurses, 18 to 21 nurses, depending on who you talk to, but really like our night shift right now has 6. And I mean, we have patients that are dying in our ER, and it gets to a point where we're like, do we bring this up to the public? We don't want to scare the public because we are the safety net, but at the same time, we're doing them a disservice by not talking about it, by not saying anything. So we're kind of stuck in between this like rock and a hard place. Like, do we go out to the community and say your hospital is incredibly unsafe, even though this is your only resource? Or do we just cover it up and hide it, and while you're having patients suffer? You didn't say anything else? Yeah. Oh, yeah. Sorry, I forgot one thing that I was supposed to talk about. We had an experience. So the private sector, they were about to talk when they were rounding at hospitals, which is a very common thing to do. That's the best way to organize, is having face-to-face conversations with nurses. And so we heard from our private sector nurses saying, like, when they were campaigning, oh, we talk on all the units, and so we felt that why don't we see that in the public sector that much from your own rank and file nurses? So one of my friends over there, Sarah, and we walked. She works at Harlem Hospital. We walked at Jacobi together one day. We're like, let's just invite members to it was like a bargaining Q&A session or something, strategy session. And all we did was invite members to an event. It was a NISNA event, and we just walked the hospital to invite them. And we got this backlash from my administration, which is expected, but we also felt this backlash almost from the union. Like, why did we go out of our way to do this? And it wasn't that explicit, but it was very much like implied. Like, I felt like I had to apologize for inviting members to an event that they weren't advertising too well. And ultimately, that the strategy session was to get more member input so we could have a better outcome for our contract because more people would be involved. And instead, we kind of felt like we got phone calls from like other nurses saying, oh, your CNO, your administrator is looking around, like looking for you in the hospital. They are afraid that you're telling the nurses to strike, which is really funny because we weren't. And I felt that the CNO, the administrator, it almost like they had the union leadership on speed dial, which is to me kind of problematic, because very problematic. It's like, why are they calling my union right away, and why is my union seemingly upset at me? So that's the experience that I had. Sorry, took up your time.
Lillian? Okay.
Hi, everyone. I'm Lillian. I've worked in the ER of Lincoln Hospital in the South Bronx for the past 4.5 years. Kelly has rounded with me there as well. And this is obviously a very frustrating conversation for all of us, right? Because it's really easy to malign management. It's really easy to vilify the boss. But you end up fighting a battle that is against management in your contract, which is to be expected. And then obstruction, basically, by some of your own union leaders, as Kelly alluded to. Then in addition, being in public sector versus private sector, you have that disadvantage. When the Big Four and the Alliance contract was up, there were contract action teams in each hospital, or that's the impression I got. There was like a very well-oiled machine, and I don't see any of that happening in public sector. We're trying to build that slowly, even though our contract is almost up. I don't want to go too off topic, but one of the things I wanted to talk about was not only obstruction on this level of a union stopping its members from organizing and raising awareness of a contract, but also what I find on a larger level to be obstruction of our own values, of the things that we care about the most. And I'm really glad this panel is tonight, because I just got an email from the union today that I wanted to just share part of, where it says, we believe that health, this is a letter to Bill de Blasio. It says, we believe that health care is a human right, not a luxury for a privileged few. I think we all can agree with that. Yet our governor has seen fit to cut vital public health funding for our city, and only our city, which will be especially harmful to low-income and immigrant New Yorkers, communities of color, and other marginalized New Yorkers. In the most recent New York State budget, Governor Cuomo and the state legislature cut public health works reimbursement by 16%, resulting in more than 62 million in lost funding to essential New York City public health programs. And to give you an idea of what that means, that would be reducing the number of inspections of cooling towers that prevent the spread of Legionella. That would be fewer distributed Narcan kits to reverse overdoses and clean syringes, and also the efforts to combat the measles outbreak, by the way. So those are all the things. And I say all of that, we can all agree that's a horrible thing. I say all of that to lead to the fact that NISNA endorsed Governor Cuomo the last time around. And not only endorsed, not only was in vocal support, but I have the number here. In 2018 alone, in that part of the election cycle, I think that covers about a year, they gave $64,600 to Governor Cuomo's campaign. I think that only covers 2017 to 2018. So this is to a governor that not only made, that they are saying, that is cutting public funding to New York City health programs, but also has, NISNA, I have the resolution from last year's convention that they would make the New York Health Act a top legislative priority, they would make passing single payer in New York and across the country a legislative priority. Governor Cuomo, I think even publicly in his debate with Cynthia Nixon, said he does not believe in having single payer pass in New York State. In addition, he has all these, endorsements of safe staffing, which he always seems to say right before summer recess. So he had a big statement on June 22nd of last year how he would introduce legislation this year in the next budget to help with staffing ratios and lessen the burden on New York State nurses and health professionals. I've seen nothing of the sort, and if anything, it's been worse. So that's just one example of an issue I see that I think we must combat as labor activists, because that is your union not necessarily obstructing your activist work on the ground, but also utilizing your dues to pay politicians to hopefully get a seat at the table, when meanwhile, and this is true over, I think Cuomo got over $30,000 at the same time from the single CEO of Montefiore Hospital. So I don't see how 64,000, obviously that's not really influencing anything, even if you do believe in making contributions. So all of that's to say that to get a more democratic union, we also have to think, where are our dues going, to whom, what are they doing with this? And that's another additional consideration we must make on a larger scale.
So next we're going to hear from, on the phone, Xenia Green, who's a pediatric ICU nurse at Montefiore Medical Center in the Bronx.
I am. Can you guys hear me? All right, phenomenal. Sorry I came on a little late. I was actually working and had to get fine out. Thank you for having me. I am one of the nurses that was on the negotiating committee for Montefiore. The way I started getting more involved in the union was because I was working in really horrible conditions in the ICU, and I saw what the results were towards my patients and my families with not having enough equipment or not having enough staff. And I started doing some organizing, which I didn't know I was doing, and it ended up getting some results. Hold on, I'm hearing that you can't see the camera. Can you guys see me now? Hold on. How about now? Nope. How about now? Because I can see you guys. Now I can't. Anywho, we'll figure that out. But so I started organizing and filling out a ton of POAs and going to the community board with 13 or 15 of my colleagues in the ICU. And that really lit a fire under management, and we ended up being able to get 17 nurses hired in the PICU. From there, NISA, actually the reps came up to me and were like, hey, you look like you're really active. You should come and join us with stewards training, which I then took that organizing class, and subsequently spent a couple of more years organizing, doing a bunch of different campaigns, actually getting things done and accomplished. And I felt like, all right, cool. I know how this works now. This is a union that is about the rank and file. You come, boots to the ground, whatever you need. You organize around it. You build an escalation plan. Every single nurse is part of the process, and we lead, any issue that's going on at Montefiore. It comes from the nurses, is led by the nurses, and it's completed by the nurses. So when I went into negotiations, that's sort of the model, the democratic model that I had in my head, right? I didn't think that negotiations was going to be that far from what we had been doing all along in the hospital, organizing, campaigning, negotiating for a better work environment. And I have to say, I was unpleasantly surprised that it really felt, and I had asked a lot of questions before this negotiation because it was my first negotiations and I didn't know what to expect. And pretty much everyone was like, no, it'll be fine. It's a lot like, what you do in the hospital. You're going to have your lead negotiator. You're going to have, the president and Judy, and they're going to run the global, and then you guys are going to break up into local. But what I felt personally was that I really didn't have the voice that I had in the facility. And in my opinion, it was very top-down kind of approach where I would ask, what's on the agenda, what areas of the proposal are we covering? And I was basically told, like, you'll find out sort of when you get there. So suffice to say, when it got to the most important element for Montefiore, which is staffing, when NISNA and management decided to actually talk about staffing, it was sort of put to the back burner. It was left for the very end. It was done at, like, we started talking about it at 4 or 5 or 6 in the evening, and didn't finish talking about it until 4 or 5 or 6 in the morning. And every time we came to the table about staffing, which by and large, the big 4 hospitals, the bargaining survey showed from a year ago that the single most important issue that nurses had in not only the big 4, but in the state of New York, in the country, is staffing. So I was very frustrated over the fact that it was not spoken about until the very last days of negotiations. It was started at, early evening, and didn't end up finishing that discussion into the wee hours of the morning when we were completely exhausted, had been up, for 18, 20, 21 hours. And I remember vehemently saying, like, I don't understand how we're doing this. I don't understand this process. I'm not sure how this is a tactic. We're all exhausted. Nobody can think straight. We've run the numbers. We each know what each hospital needs. What they're offering isn't even close. We can do better. We should put the strike back on the table. And it never happened. And I feel like, and that wasn't an opinion that I solely felt. I am representing the nurses at Montefiore, and I do a lot of rounding. I do a lot of talking to nurses in all different areas. I work in an ICU. My ratio is 1 to 2. We have ratios at Montefiore already. We were trying to get better ratios with this contract. And I was speaking for the nurses, and oftentimes I would have my contract action team leaders call in. They would call in on my phone. I had a conference line, and I would run things by them, and they would say to me, oh, heck no, I'd rather go out on strike. There's no way. I'm not accepting this. That's not good enough. And I was like, all right, this is not good enough. My members are saying, the rank and file is saying, this is not good enough. They're talking to nurses on the units. It's not good enough. And I felt like completely ignored. The decisions were being made, and it didn't have rank and file input. It didn't even seem to have negotiating committee input, and it was really frustrating. And multiple times at the table, we said, myself and others on the Monte team, this is not going to pass at Montefiore. The Montefiore nurses are not going to settle for this. They know exactly what they need. They know how to read an MOA. This is not going to pass. And subsequently, it didn't pass. The first time it didn't pass at all. I don't know how far Catherine got into that first vote, but suffice to say, negotiation process, if this is the way it normally occurs, felt very undemocratic to me. That's my opinion. Others might have a varying opinion on that, but I would have hoped that there would have been more conversations with the negotiating committee, with the nurses in the facilities, where we collectively came up with a strategy and a bottom line, and we stuck to it.
Thanks. So our last speaker today is going to be Trey, who is an ICU nurse at Mount Sinai. She's been a shop steward for 2 years and helped to develop the Shop Stewards Council. She was very involved in Sinai's strike mobilization and then later organizing rank and file nurses to vote down the contract. And she's also an editor and writer for Left Voice and a member of DSA Labor Branch. So.
Hey, all. Thanks for being here on a rainy, rainy night and trekking up here, especially Plattsburgh folks for making the trip. I want to just recognize and acknowledge the courage it takes for the nurses who are here, the folks who are in the audience, who have been fighting tirelessly and building power at their workplaces, developing confidence and leadership in coworkers, and now also this contradiction of a bureaucracy, a very entrenched, very powerful, and very ungenerous with their control bureaucracy. So I want to acknowledge the courage that takes, and it's not just the individuals up here, but y'all who are here, who are showing your support, your interest, who have been with us on the picket lines, who have circulated our petitions and are accompanying us all along. So we've heard from all of these accounts, multiple facilities, a common thread, which is, we're ready to fight. Nurses were this close to striking. We, nurses on an individual level with their families, had saved up for months. We're gonna take the hit of losing health insurance, losing their pay, because they were absolutely steadfast committed to the vision for what we were gonna win, and convinced of our power to do that if and when it came to a strike. So what went wrong? Why didn't we do it? And also, why did we end up with a contract that was not, was very far from meeting our goals and our expectations, and frankly, our ability to win? So the union, the labor movement and unions for decades in the United States have been very kind of married to this two-lane road that leads to utter failure, which is, on the one hand, lobbying and legislative strategies, putting all efforts into that. And some of my colleagues have referred to why that ends up being giving over our power to political parties and politicians who have absolutely no interest in fighting for us in their positions and who are very tied to actually the boss's class. And secondly, on that same two-lane road, we have collaboration with management. We have the seeking of common ground with bosses, which we know if management wins, we don't win, workers don't win. In this contract, if management comes out cheering and sending us emails saying, this was great, I'm glad we could come to this, if management is telling members at Montefiore, you should vote for this contract, that smells bad for a reason. So given that commitment to that strategy, which is not about rank and file power, not about combativeness, not about leveraging our force where we have it, we have bureaucratic, top-down, staff-driven unions. And we have here and there some amazing staff who have made a decision to support nurses, to support workers, support the rank and file at their risk, at the risk of their jobs and careers. And we've seen how that goes sometimes. So that said, for the most part, we have a model of unionism that prevails in New York City, in this country, that makes workers and nurses constituents, passive, demobilized in our facilities, asking what's going on with our own damn contract. So we really have to change the tides on that. We have to subvert that entire thing. We're gonna destroy it and we have to make a change. That's what we're here to talk about, to think about, to problematize the existing current characterization of our union. So the way we can do that is Especially, we have to put up a principled fight for a democratic union that is not bureaucratic. When I say bureaucratic, what does that mean? What do I mean by that? Union bureaucracy, if we look at NYSNA's case, we have almost 100 people who are on staff at NYSNA. That's a very overbloated staff. West Virginia had, what, a dozen? And they had a successful strike last year where they defended public. I'm just saying, it's a pretty big staff. We have a director who Bobby referred to, Jill Ferrillo, who has carte blanche authority over everyone on that staff. If someone goes against the political agenda that's determined by the leadership of the officials of the union, they will be transferred to another facility or they will risk losing their job, period. So there's a lot of constraints on people there. We have this parallel structure within NYSNA, which is very strange, where you have an entirely appointed and staff over on this side, and then you have elected officers who run the gambit in terms of how much they are or aren't complacent with the problems, with these issues. So in general, union bureaucracy, union officialdom, as I see it, they are set apart and away from the vast majority of members and workers. They normally have very different working conditions, and those conditions are definitely not affected by how hard you're gonna fight or if you are or you're not gonna strike. So their contracts don't change whether or not we get ratios or whether or not we get wage increases that go with inflation. And you know, I would include, I mean, some people make a strict delimitation, but I would include top elected officials who go along with that logic in that category. So talking about, you know, we've had many examples and that we're discussing among nurses of reforming unions and different strategies to do that. There have been many people with great intentions who have made efforts to get elected into positions of leadership in unions, with or without, but mostly without, a movement, a bottom-up movement of real rank and file power, the development of rank and file power, and those people being put into those positions at the service of those members and workers who've gained that force in the union. So we have, in the case of NYSNA, for example, we had a reform leadership that was objectively more progressive than the last leadership which was just terribly reactionary and openly collaborating with management. In fact, allowed managers in our union, which would obviously tie our hands behind our back in important situations. So yes, this leadership took over with a very low rate of participation in the vote, and there was not a caucus or current that was behind this leadership. It was a very small number of people. And they came in with very good intentions, perhaps. But what we see is that they have utterly failed the test. It's been about 8-9 years and have utterly failed the test of being 100% with any glimmer of rank and file organizing, any possibility where members are becoming too smart and learning, wait, this is my union, I want to take control of this. Give me the resources, help me do that, help me learn. What do I do? How do this person is threatening me. Help me feel brave in that position. No. So we have to go past this strategy of, well, I'll get elected and I'm really smart and I have great politics and I'll just do the right thing when I have to. We need a rank and file, true ground up, true member, a mass movement within each of our unions and in the labor movement in general. And I think a lot of people would understand that. So how do we have rank and file unionism? I'm sorry, I don't have the answers. I just have a few ideas of good examples I've seen, good experiences we've had, and I'm just gonna point to a few of those. And then I'll close up so we can talk. Organizing know-how, workshops, training people to do the thing at their workplaces and not depend on the service unionism style where anything happens, let me call the staff, let me call the rep. I don't know how to fight for myself. What are my rights? So yes, we need that. That's good. That includes developing shop stewards. At Mount Sinai Hospital, we spent a year prior to the contract developing shop stewards, 30 to 40 nurses who were not the executive officers. But at the time when the strike was withdrawn, and our bargaining committees were a united front to withdraw the strike, and they were a united front again to force this contract to be ratified. The shop stewards, we were the ones who were 100% with the rank and file who were opposed to these measures. The ones who were like, no, wait, we went into this expecting this, and you're giving us that, and you're telling us it's good? No. So we really gave a voice to that. We petitioned, we pushed the leadership, knowing that we weren't really being heard, but we pushed them to show we're ready to strike, put back the notice. So at Sinai, we were able to get to that far, but we weren't able to totally change the tides. Another element I think is important is what we have here, which are the militant nurses, the ones who have a political idea, a political vision, beyond just the day-to-day, the ones who are willing to put their necks on the line. And that is, I'm sorry, it's not about martyrdom, but we need leadership. We need people who are not afraid, who are not going to be elected and be afraid to lose that position, who are going to fight for their principles to the end, even at the risk of being impeached. So that's what we need. And, rank and fileism. Sorry, I'm blinking out. Okay, so those are some elements here and there, and I think that something that is often missing in the discussion and how we don't replicate the errors or the limitations of other reform efforts is the need to fight for political independence of the working class. So that's like a mouthful, right? But what does that mean? I think we've already alluded to how we place our bets in a political machinery and political organizations and politicians who have time and time again proved to all of us, and especially proved to their true constituency, the bosses, the owners, the ones who exploit us, the ones who wage wars, that we got them. And yet we have our organizations putting our members' dues and our staff and our members and telling them we're going to vote those guys in because maybe this time they'll do something different. So let's stop that. So that's a no. Not even a dime, not even a penny to the interests of those who oppress us. And that includes, so we have to have an alternative strategy, one that relies on our forces, one that relies on our collective power. Individually, we're just nurses being run to the fucking ground. We're tired. There's not much I can do. I'm tired, I come home, I'm like, I just wanna lay here, put my feet up. For real, edema, But we had a taste of our power with 12,000 nurses ready to strike. And we all are so angry here because we felt that taken away. And that is very important. That's a very important lesson. It's not a happy ending, but it's something we have to build on. Nurses are learning that we need to take control. This union must be democratic. If it listened to members, this would have gone down differently. So not about what's on paper anymore, it's in action. What has our union done let's make a critical balance. What has our union done over the last 9 years? How can we build on the strengths, but how do we really move past what we have today? At the end of the day, the outcome of any of these fights is based on force. It's not based on carroting management or having people who are likable by management in the room meeting with them. That's very comfortable. A small room of people deciding what the fate of many nurses and workers will be. That's not how we're gonna win. So we have to rely on ourselves, we have to rely on each other, and we have the world to win. Thank you.
Okay, so can we just have one more round of applause for our panelists? Okay, so we're gonna move into the Q&A part now, if that's all right. Feel free to get food as we're going along with it, that's cool. So just a few ground rules. If you have a question, just raise your hand and someone will put you on